If this happens, analog music dies tonight and nobody can stop it. I'm going to talk about how the fate of analog music lies in the hands of one company, how we got to this point, and what the future looks like. So sit down, grab a cup of coffee, because analog music is at DEFCON 4. The idea for this video came from a comment on the last video I did about why vinyl records are so expensive, and we're going to go into that in great detail. And the more you find out about it, the scarier it gets, and nobody is talking about it. So we're going to talk about what this company does, who they are, how we got to the point that we're at, why nobody else is doing what they do, and what can be done if they go under, which isn't very much. This is the story of Public Record Company Limited, based out of Japan, and how they have a global monopoly on record production. Before we get too deep into this video, we have to talk about what they do. The Public Record Company Limited in Japan, they make lacquer discs. After the record is EQ'd and mastered, then the grooves are cut into the lacquer disc. It's electroplated, and then it becomes the master of all the records that come after it, because it's the stamp. They're thin aluminum discs coated with nitrocellulose lacquer, which we'll talk about later. It's like the first gremlin. So don't feed it after midnight or get it wet. Because if you get it wet, then you get a bunch of other gremlins coming off of it, which aren't quite like the first gremlin. Some of them have mohawks. They're different, but they all came from the first gremlin. So let this sink in for a moment. There's only one company in the entirety of the world that makes these things. And the entirety of the record industry depends on these things. But why? How did we get here? There used to be a bunch of these lacquer disc manufacturers, including Transco Products Corp. From the US. They were founded in 1959, and they were one of the largest lacquer disc manufacturers globally, blank ones. And they sold to pressing plants and mastering houses across the United States and the world. However, they were acquired by Apollo Masters in the 80s. And their brand was folded into Apollo Masters, which we will get to later. Pyrail/RMGI out of France and / Netherlands. That doesn't make any sense. What do? They made lacquer discs and magnetic tape. What happened? They stopped making lacquer discs and leaned into magnetic tape. And eventually they were acquired and merged with RTM, Recording the Masters, and they no longer produce lacquers. EMI EMI out of the UK. What do? Well, they made lacquer discs for EMI, which is a big record company. What happened? Well, they stopped making lacquer discs because, well, in the 1980s, not a lot of people were buying vinyl. EMI didn't want to do that anymore. And it was not spun off during the digital transition. And then you had lacquer suppliers in Japan, which were a few of them. Most of them were very small and regional, and most of them faded out in the 1980s and 90s. But there was one that survived, and they were known as the Public Record Company. Also, some people call them the Matsudo Disc Company. But they're the same thing. They're still around. But we got to go back to the US, to California. And that's with Apollo Masters Corporation. Remember? They bought Transco Products Corp. And they were founded in the 1980s when they merged with Transco. And in the early 2000s, Apollo shot to the moon. Get it? They were supplying 70 to 80% of the world's lacquer discs for all their record production needs. Things were going great until the entire thing was destroyed by fire on February 6, 2020. Burned to the ground. Nothing left. And the facility was never rebuilt. And guess what? Sometimes you really don't need to do anything right. You just have to wait for everybody else to die. And then there was one. Public Record Co. in Japan. But why doesn't anybody else do this? Volatile and dangerous chemistry. How fun is that? Remember when we talked about lacquer discs being a little aluminum disc that's coated with nitrocellulose lacquer? Remember that? Well, it's highly flammable and explosive under heat, as the fine folks at Apollo found out. Violently. on February 6, 2020. You don't want heat, you don't want friction, you don't want static electricity. It's also classified as hazardous material, and it's very heavily regulated, except in Japan, where they can still do whaling. Which it all kind of makes sense, right? So it must be manufactured in an explosive-proof facility with very strict temperature, humidity, and static electricity rules. Ironically, nitrocellulose is also a chemical that's used in film photography, which notoriously burst into flames. Why are all the things that I love highly flammable? It also contains amyl acetate or butyl acetate, used as solvents, also flammable. It also contains toluene and xylene in some formulas, known to cause neurological and respiratory harm if mishandled. What can possibly go wrong? Because of this, there are extreme environmental regulations. The EPA in the US and other similar bodies in the UK and other places would require extensive hazard mitigation, chemical disposal systems, and clean room grade ventilation. How do they do it in Japan? We don't know, because this company is they don't talk very much. You're not getting a tour at Public Record Co. in Matsuda, Japan. Not gonna happen. And guess what else? Leftover lacquer can't be disposed of. It's gotta be chemically processed somewhere. Or you can take it 12 miles or greater out to sea in international waters and dump it. You can, seriously. It's crazy, but you can. So I'll put it to you this way. It's probably easier to start up a nitroglycerin plant inside a fireworks stand than it is to start up a lacquer disc company in the United States. But they do it in Japan. And they also go whaling. But even if someone wanted to go through all of that headache with regulations, and hazardous duty disposal and all that stuff, it's expensive. There's not a lot of ROI there. Probably costs between 5 to 10 millions to start up a plant. It's also very proprietary. Little chemical tweaks, little secret recipes. It's like Coke. You're not gonna get that recipe. It's also highly tuned to specific lathe cutting stuff. I don't know why any of that matters though if there's only one global supplier, so it's all the same. So why not just reverse engineer it? Well, I'm glad you asked, because reverse engineering it is next to impossible. And even Apollo Masters company had their little secrets, but guess what? They all burned to the ground and were lost forever. No digital backups of their chemistry is known to exist. I hope Coke is locked down somewhere in Atlanta in a vault, because I sure love Coke Zero. And then, of course, there's lack of institutional knowledge. If you have a very specialized workforce and they get old and they retire and nobody new gets trained, well, guess what? All those trade secrets, all that tribal knowledge disappears into the ethos to go to read their AARP magazines. They're not going to tell anybody about it. You're certainly not going to get anything out of the people over in Japan, because they're probably whaling in their spare time. And there's not a lot of incentive to do it, because even though vinyl's growing, it's not growing at a pace that would really justify someone starting a nitroglycerin plant inside of a fireworks facility in an explosion-proof factory. And then it would take 10 years to tweak the recipe to be just perfect. There was a bit of a freak out in the industry in 2020 after Apollo Masters burnt down. Ben Blackwell, who was co-founder of Third Man Records with Jack White, he said, quote, "From my understanding, this fire will represent a problem for the vinyl industry worldwide. There were only 2 companies that did this, and the one in Japan was already having, I'm paraphrasing, was already having trouble keeping up with demand." David Reed, who was the vinyl production coordinator at Duplication, remarked, "This is going to be a big problem. This will directly affect all vinyl plants, bands, labels." But in response to all this, the Vinyl Alliance kept a cool head. They emphasized the industry's resilience and alternatives. They said there are already alternatives available which will help bridge the shortage of lacquer discs. This can also be an opportunity to embrace new technologies and to strengthen collaboration within the industry. So did that happen in the last 5 years? Not really. There is direct metal mastering, DMM. Some of the advantages: enhanced high-frequency reproduction and clarity. However, some people think they're grainy and too harsh on top. So it's an advantage and a disadvantage all at the same time. Reduced surface noise with lower distortions and shorter production time because there's fewer electroplating steps. However, there are challenges. So there's limited lathes that can do work with them. And some audiophiles think that, well, they don't sound like records. And of course, they require special equipment and expertise. There's also HD vinyl. What is it? It utilizes 3D modeling and laser inscription to create stamper molds directly bypassing the need for lacquer. That sounds good, right? Well, it's still in development. The benefits would be increased precision and consistency, and it would be environmentally friendly production process. So there wouldn't be a nitroglycerin plant in a fireworks stand in an explosion-proof facility with a bunch of noxious chemicals. What are the pushbacks on it? Well, it's gonna cost a lot of money. And there's another alternative. 3D printed records. So you have a 3D printer and it makes records. That's about it. That's pretty much it. However, it's currently limited to mono recordings only. And it's not suitable for mass production because of time and cost restraints. And it's primarily a novelty for archival purposes. So that's not an alternative at all. Not to mention, it would probably stop halfway through. Like if you're making a Rocktopus, and my buddy, John, he's the father of Rocktopus. He makes these. I think he had to go through 33 to get this one because it kept stopping midway through. That's probably what would happen with our 3D record making machine. So what happens if Public Record Co. or Matsudo Disc Company, what happens if they go under? I don't know. I wish this thing had a happy ending, but it really doesn't. It's not like there's somebody waiting in the wings to just start up their facility. I actually heard that there's only 20 people that work for this place. If that, nobody really knows. It was rumored that somebody was doing this out of their garage in Japan. It's not like we can bust in there, grab a bucket of it, and send it over to Temu or somewhere on Alibaba and get them to reverse engineer it. Not to mention it's some type of Colonel Sanders special Coca-Cola recipe that nobody knows about, nobody can recreate. And even if they could, they may burst into flames, get a neurological disorder, and die of respiratory issues. This is crazy, right? I can't believe no one's talking about this. So should you care? Absolutely. Record prices are expensive enough. Can you imagine what it would cost to get new technology up and running? And the absolute outcry from the audiophile world because it's not going to sound as good as vinyl, lacquer. Listen, a little bit of environmental hazardous chemicals and people dying of neurological disorders and respiratory problems should not keep us from being able to enjoy a freshly pressed copy of Tubular Bells. So this is what would happen. Prices would go up, small labels and artists would be pushed out, there'd be massive delays, and it would be like trying to go buy toilet paper in 2020. I never understood that. So I got a kick out of this. When I looked up what indie record labels are doing, they're rationing lacquer. That's what they're doing. They're using every disc wisely and minimizing test cuts. And guess what I talked about in the last video? How vinyl record sound diminishes if you overuse a lacquer disc, which are now being rationed. That all leads to bad sounding vinyl pressings. Some companies are leaning into the DMM, direct metal mastering. They're investing in lathes, especially in Europe. GZ Media and Optimal Media. Some people are hoarding it. They're placing giant orders and keeping it, hopefully in an explosion-proof area. And they're experimenting with different stuff, but guess what? Nothing's working. Nobody has the answer to this question. Nobody's ready for it. And God forbid somebody sneezes the wrong way or lights up a cigarette in the wrong area. And we all know that people in Japan love to smoke. So please be careful, Public Record Co. Limited, Matsudo. Because this vinyl castle is built on a house of cards that's on a beach. On sand, built on sand, and a house of cards. What I'm trying to say is it's fragile and stuff's gonna move around. Because we're one bad piece of sushi, one burp, one toot away from the global apocalypse of vinyl record production as we know it, with no backups. I can't believe this is actually true. To me, this is crazy, but it is true. If you like this video, why don't you check out the video I just did about the real reason why vinyl prices are so high. And this really needed to be the only reason, but I go into a bunch more. I will link that right up here. Please like and subscribe. Thank you so much for watching.